From literally nailing actors' phones to walls because of his anger issues, to being called a racist because of his Avatar films. These are the real reasons why people hate James Cameron. For starters, there are tons of behind-the-scenes horror stories involving the director. Like, for example, did you know that he quite literally used to nail the actors' phones to the wall of the set? Yup, I get all these expert directors have got their own techniques, but this seems like it was done just to get people to hate him. And the reason behind it is something that'll really make you question his mental state. Turns out, he's got a bit of an anger management issue. In fact, his temper can rival the likes of Alfred Hitchcock if you ask certain actors, especially Sam Worthington, who revealed this whole nailing phones to the wall situation. According to the actor, James doesn't really like people using their phones all the time on set. So if you're in a James Cameron movie, you better learn to keep your phone aside for a few hours. Hey, I guess that's a good way to keep everyone concentrated. But of course, it's an easy way to get people to hate you, because not all actors may be comfortable with keeping their phones aside. Some of them may feel like it's an invasion of privacy, and others may just find the whole rule kind of silly. But hey, if you plan on working with James, I suppose this is one of those things you're just gonna have to learn to deal with. But that's not the only reason why people outright hate him. There's also the fact that he's just straight up rude pretty often. Like, get this. One of the executives who was working on Avatar made a suggestion to James about the film's runtime. Turns out he thought the movie was just a tad bit too long, and he thought that there was room to trim it a bit, while still keeping the overall story and structure engaging. It's a harmless enough suggestion, right? And I think most people would simply agree or disagree with it and then just move on with their lives. But nope, not James. He felt the need to cuss out the executive, and basically went completely crazy just because of a suggestion. Like, I get that he's dedicated to his movies, but an overreaction like this definitely comes off as a bit pretentious. And it's one of the reasons why people just don't like the guy. I like the Avatar films as much as the next person, but let's be real. Do we really need almost 3 hours of blue-skinned aliens running around from place to place? After a while, it just feels like you've had an overload of visual effects, but hey, James doesn't like being questioned apparently. Even if what you're doing is making a suggestion that could lead to a better final result, no wonder some people can't stand him. But I'm only just getting started here, because some people also dislike the director for what he puts his actors through. I won't be surprised if some of the actors in the Avatar films decide to call out the director once the franchise is all done and dusted, because just hearing about the stuff he makes them endure makes me really feel for them. Like, did you know that to get the actors in the mood for the Avatar sequel, James had them all go down to a sense memory odyssey? Sounds fun, right? Well, wrong. Because this odyssey really just means that they were all taken to a rainforest and made to stay there. If you're someone who enjoys that sort of stuff, then I can see why you may enjoy such a trip. But being forced to go on this haphazard adventure alongside someone like James, well, that's not exactly a dream vacation if you ask me. I can see why actors who aren't too fond of the wilderness may end up hating the guy after such an experience. The unpredictable weather, the endless humidity, oh, and don't even get me started on the bugs. It really must have been quite a nerve-wracking experience for the cast of Avatar, that's for sure, though it may have brought them all close together, and they might even have bonded over something, with that something being their collective hate for James Cameron, of course. His antics on film sets aside, there are tons of other reasons why he gets hate. For example, some folks feel like he's just a hypocrite. A lot of people feel like his whole shtick about being dedicated to conservation and climate change comes across as a bit phony. It's hard to be preaching a message about saving the planet when you're literally damaging it intensely by flying around in private jets. Even the messages that he gives out through his films feel pretty shallow to some people, like the fact that in Avatar, it really just comes down to technology being bad and nature being good, whereas in real life, it's a lot more complicated than that. And let's not forget the sheer irony of the Titanic film literally featuring an expensive boat to showcase human hubris, when in fact, the movie itself was the most expensive film to have been made at the time of its release. So, Cameron isn't really one to talk when he falls for the same traps he's supposedly criticizing. A lot of people just kinda dislike the guy for his holier-than-thou attitude toward his messages. The director makes it seem like he's the most most important person to be talking about these matters, when the truth is that there are other activists and researchers that have been doing a lot more legitimate work than making overly long movies about aliens on another planet. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, some people think his films are pretty racist and tone-deaf, especially the latest Avatar sequel. Many people have been questioning the casting choices of the Avatar movies, with the majority of the cast being white, despite the story being deeply rooted in the culture of people of color, specifically Native Americans. It's not hard to see why people have a problem with this, especially when you consider the history of white colonizers taking over other lands and robbing them of their resources. The sequel, like the first movie, focuses on colonizers taking over the moon Pandora and its resources. Although the movie paints this in a negative light, the fact that it's still predominantly white cast members doing the colonizing has made it hard for some people to enjoy the movie. Fans even started movements to boycott the movie to limit the number of people who saw it, but it doesn't look like they were able to gain much momentum worldwide. And I mean, sure, the film had some great visuals, but it's hard not to cringe at every second of the movie because of the way it showcases the culture of indigenous people. Because of this controversy, fans started hating the guy even more, and some even asked for him to get canceled. People think his films are a classic example of the white savior complex. Like, on the one hand, you might think it's a good thing that a massive blockbuster like Avatar is spreading the message that colonization and greed are bad, and that we need to respect the rights of indigenous peoples. But some fans argue that the film's message is too simplistic and patronizing. I mean, come on, we all know that colonizing and exploiting other cultures is a bad thing. People don't need a multi-million-dollar film to tell us that. Plus, some fans think that the film's white guilt is just another form of racism. Director James Cameron has expressed regret over the actions of European colonizers toward indigenous peoples, and some fans think he's using that guilt to fuel his films. But at the end of the day, the main character and savior of the story is still a white guy named Jake. Loads of people argued that it would have been better to have a native Na'vi as the main character, or cast an actor of indigenous descent as Jake. And that's not all. Some fans are calling him out even more, even going as far as to term his terrible representation of indigenous people as blueface. Yue Begay, a Navajo artist, started this trend. According to her, the movie appropriates the culture of indigenous people, just so someone's white savior complex can be satiated. Begay further added that black and indigenous people are more than enough to play aliens that are quite clearly based on them. And she's got a point. People of color should have been the ones that were cast for these roles, and their voices should have been used. The artist also stated that her Lakota relatives were some of the most powerful people in the United States. They fought, and they did win. Their ancestors must be proud to see their descendants thriving and living while still keeping their cultural values intact. It's clear that she disagrees with James's idea that it's a dead-end society. Yup, he literally called the Lakota Sioux Nation that. While she's not against the idea of the movie, Begay thinks that people of color should have been hired for it, both on screen and in the writing rooms and consultancy departments. But until that happens, this is just more fuel for the people that outright hate the guy. Though, from being called a racist because of his Avatar films, to nailing actors' phones on his film sets because of his anger issues, those were the real reasons why people hate James Cameron.